Rich, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me down.
I'm going to start by just telling a little bit about your early days in business.
Yeah, I think my business career started at quite a young age. I was pretty inspired by business as a kid and a little bit entrepreneurial. My first endeavors were picking mandarins off a local mandarin tree and packing those up in a brown paper bag and door knocking around the neighborhood, selling those for $2 a bag when I was probably 7 or 8 years old. When I was a little bit older, I was a keen golfer, and there were a lot of road golf balls at the golf course I played at, Pimble Golf Club down the North Shore. So I'd collect the golf balls, and again, during my school holidays, I'd door knock and sell the golf balls. It was a bit of a flawed business model because I'd individually price each ball based on what I thought it was worth. So it was a good learning around friction in the sales process and keeping things much simpler than I did.
And was that business something that was part of the upbringing?
Yeah, it was. My dad was quite entrepreneurial. In the early 80s, he started a company called Coombes Technology and was building computers through the 80s. He then subsequently went on to have a business in credit risk systems for the financial services sector. Unfortunately, he passed away quite young, but he did have a proper crack at business. And I think that entrepreneurial mindset, having a go, really inspired both myself and my older brother, who I also went into business with on several occasions.
Now, looking at your LinkedIn profile, you talk about four-time founder. What does that look like? Just give us an overview of what that means.
Yeah, so in 2010, after 5 years in investment banking, I did get the entrepreneurial itch.
Yep.
I'd spent 5 years in equity capital markets and mergers, acquisitions, and deep down, I really wanted to be on the other side of the table, building things and starting things from scratch. I was helping a lot of business owners and founders and successful companies reach the next stage of their growth journey. And fundamentally, I thought it was the right time to take the plunge and have a go myself. So I did have a few different business ideas. I had three. When I left banking, I had three. And I basically gave myself 3 to 4 months to come up with a concrete business plan with one of those ideas and execute. So the first one was Batlow Cider, which was back then in 2010, craft cider was an emerging, it was not existent as a category, but the tailwinds from the UK cider market were flowing into Australia. So I saw an opportunity. I was sitting up on a grassy hill in the eastern suburbs, drinking imported product. And I just thought we had so much great produce. Why don't we create a great cider that's reflective of that? And that was really the genesis. That was my first foray into business. And it really kickstarted a bunch of other endeavors that I got involved with too. When I left banking, I did like the idea of starting multiple things. And my goal was to start 5 businesses within 10 years. And about 18 months after launching Batlow Cider, I teamed up with both my brother and Victoria Coffee, and we launched Will & Co Coffee as a joint venture. So we launched that in 2012. My next business venture was through supplying cider to some of my great customers down in the Canberra region. We became quite good friends, and they reached out to me, letting me know that they were thinking about putting a tap room, like a small pilot brew system at the back of one of their venues in Braddon. So we got together, we discussed that. Long story short, we ended up bringing in some additional capital, self-funding it, and building a full manufacturing site out in Fyshwick, which became Capital Brewing. So that was my beverage career in sort of 5 to 6 years. And then in 2019, I teamed up with an old friend and we launched a B2B marketplace for the beverages sector, connecting the fragmented market of beverage producers with hospitality venues and liquor retailers, because that market was very antiquated. It was ripe for disruption, and we saw a big opportunity.
And so you've gone through those processes. What was the biggest learning from all of that when you reflect?
Yeah, I think just get going. I think I did have a few other ideas during university. In 2003, I spent a lot of time during my uni holidays working on an online concept selling excess stock from retailers online, but it was analysis paralysis, and I didn't take the plunge. Whereas, ultimately, if you want to start a business, you just got to get going. And no matter how small that is, just getting an MVP live and getting in market and getting feedback, I think that was my biggest learning. When I started Batlow Cider, we were going to partnership with very conservative apple growers. So the level of forecasting, modeling, cash flow projections, it was to the cent. And I'd spent a lot of time on that side of the business. Whereas if I was focused more on growth and customer feedback, we probably could have scaled that quite a lot quicker than we did. We still got it to a meaningful size pretty quickly. It was multiple millions in revenue on a bit of a shoestring within a few years. However, and that's wholesale revenue. However, I think the launch of that business took longer than it should have, because we were perfecting the product. We were perfecting everything versus just getting something in market. So I think just get going, no matter how scrappy it is. Just take that first step, whatever that first step looks like. Just take the plunge versus writing the perfect business plan, perfecting the idea, perfecting the brand, perfecting the product. You may think the product is great. I thought this is where the product needed to be. In fact, our biggest seller was a slightly different product than where we set out to create it from the get-go. That was for the first business.
When you look at all of those different businesses, which one do you consider to be your biggest success?
I think they're all successful in different ways. They are all authentic brands. All the products that we created were, we spent a lot of time in getting the products, making sure the quality, the supply chain that we used, the production, the level of effort and due diligence and research, and the methodology we took to create great products was pretty consistent across the board. I think looking back, I think the brewery has probably won the hearts and minds of most consumers. It's now one of the leading craft breweries in the country. And that's really a testament to the management team. I think it's worth touching on. I'm great from 0 to 1, but I'm not the manager that's going to, and I've been quite transparent with myself around that. I'm great at getting things off the ground. I'm fortunate that I've brought in or partnered with some great operators that know how to run businesses really well. And I complement that quite strongly too. Yeah, I think they're all successful in their different ways. I think as a founder, you can always be more successful. Even with Batlow, in the first couple of years, we did get approached by CUB. We were roughly in their feathers. We probably should have progressed that conversation harder than we did. We were staunch independent operators, and we've wanted to carve our own path. But looking back, doing a JV, particularly as the market turned, might have been a bit of a smarter way to scale the business.
Yeah. Each of the businesses, did you have co-founders? And what was your thought process through that, especially as you got more experience in business and understood the value of that or not? How did you play that out?
Yeah, I did. I always partnered with, I guess, people that could bring something to the table that I either couldn't or was less capable of. So with the cider business, we went in partnership with apple growers because they had the supply. They had 10% of the apple crop. Also, my brother, who's very creative, comes from more of a design background. I'm more commercial. I've got a creative head, but I am more commercial. On the coffee side, we knew how hard running a supply chain and doing every single piece of the puzzle, from procuring fruit and the seasonalities around that and producing that at scale into a juice product, and then into a base cider product, then into a final product. It was quite complex, and we looked after all the back end processes, all the invoicing, the logistics, everything we did ourselves, including deliveries at the start. By teaming up with a bigger player, with Victoria, they had that infrastructure backbone that we didn't need to create from scratch. So we did leverage that, but we employed the sales team. The sales team was run and employed by my brother and I. We had a company. So we looked after all that side, the marketing, everything around the product we oversaw, but we just leveraged a much stronger backbone. In terms of the brewery, the two core operators. They were great hospitality operators themselves. They had multiple venues. They knew how to do hospitality well, which is, I think, in this market, and that's probably the best thing we did was we doubled down on the hospitality side of the business, particularly as the craft beer wholesaling market has become much more competitive. Back when we started, it was less competitive, but was starting to get competitive, but the concept of building a national brand became tougher and tougher. So being local, having a really strong hospitality model where you could control the customer experience, but also not compete on the wholesale landscape was really valuable. So I did team up with operators, and then on the tech marketplace side, I did team up with a quite an accomplished operator in that space who'd come from a much bigger tech company, so knew how to scale businesses, knew how to build particularly tech teams and product teams, whereas I was more focused on the commercial, the brand building, and helping build the business to a reasonable scale through those channels.
Did you talked earlier about raising capital in one of the business. Did you raise capital in each business, or was it case by case?
Yeah, across the board, we have raised multiple times, particularly the last business, which was a technology business. So we raised an angel round and then a seed round and then a further subsequent round. So along the way, have raised equity and probably would have raised more equity earlier in some of those businesses. But I think as a relatively inexperienced founder, there's that balance between giving meaningful equity away. I think there's always that tension, but also taking lots of money from people is a big commitment as well. So I always had the mindset, I wanted to be lean. I wanted to scale smartly. I didn't want unhappy investors. I wanted to treat every dollar we spent like it was our own. So yeah, looking back, I probably would have done things a little bit differently. And I think if I did it again, I'd do things differently just to achieve scale a bit quicker, because I think there's nothing worse in business than floundering because you don't have the capital you need to do what you need to do.
And in terms of progressing with the businesses over the years, what was the biggest challenge in having multiple businesses along the way?
Yeah, it's a great question. At a point in time, I was working on essentially 3 startups.
Yeah.
I was quite lucky that I was young. I worked very long hours. I was building things that I was super, super passionate about. I just worked nonstop. Didn't have any kids, and work and building these brands was the number one thing that I loved doing. I had a social life. I was lucky still had a social life, but the beautiful thing is in beverages, they're quite social and lifestyle businesses where you're building a brand, but you're out at hospitality venues. And a lot of my clients and customers and distribution partners I became quite good friends with, because you spend so much time and you just got that natural alignment in passion and purpose to a degree. So probably the hardest part is that startups are really bloody demanding.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moving parts to them, particularly when you are raising money. Each of the businesses has different demands. There was some synergy from some aspects of the business and the operations, particularly the cider and the brewery. But pretty quickly we saw that those two categories were on different wavelengths in terms of their growth life cycle. The brewery became the new hot thing, whereas the cider market started to see some headwinds in sort of 2017, 2018. And I read a great quote as well, probably 3 or 4 years into my entrepreneurial journey, and this resonated, and that's, you see serial entrepreneurs, but there aren't a lot of parallel entrepreneurs. And I think having that focus, particularly in this market, it feels like the paradigm shifted a little bit with entrepreneurship, particularly in the current market conditions. Laser focus and doubling down on less brings better results. So there's always that tension between scaling and going broader and entering new markets and categories and even businesses, but also staying in your lane and doubling down and being laser focused on what you're trying to solve. I was fortunate that I did have great partners. I had great operators across the businesses. So yeah, I could lean on that a little bit, but I was still very involved, particularly in the early years of those businesses.
And in terms of getting approached by other organizations to either to sell the business or thinking about exits or whatever it might be, at certain points. What's your thought process around that, and how did you approach that with the different businesses?
Yeah, we got approached a few times across the different businesses. So as I mentioned, CUB approached us with the Cider opportunity at the back end of 2012, about 12 months after we launched, because we were ruffling feathers, acquiring a lot of taps very quickly. And I think I was a bit young and green, to be honest.
Yeah.
I should have progressed that conversation. It turns out their strategy shifted. They ended up going down the imported flavored cider path versus acquiring a local cider company. But I probably could have entertained that a little bit stronger than we did. And then later on, actually, with that business, we did have a number of, I guess, M&A conversations. Funnily enough, Capra Brewing ended up buying Batlow Cider, which meant that, the Batlow brand stayed local, which was fantastic. They were quite a large on-premise customer of ours, and they knew that business very well because of the history, which is great for both businesses, really. And then probably the most meaningful acquisition was the sale of our tech marketplace to a listed ASX company in 2021. So the negotiation took quite a few months. We had some great technology that they didn't have. They had other components of the market, not the marketplace, but the market, including bricks and mortar, warehouses and logistics services that would make a lot of sense to combine with our marketplace. So we did do a transaction with them, and the business was 100% acquired, almost 4 years ago to the day.
Yep.
So that was definitely an interesting process. Particularly being in that listed environment, that meant that our business became listed as well.
And what was that like in terms of, and your thought process as you're going through that? Was it cash or shares or combination? How did that sort of process evolve?
Yeah, it was cash and shares. So it was pretty heavy on the script side. The process took some time. They were consuming some other transactions during our negotiation process. Our shareholders, we wanted to look after very well too. So we made sure that everything they invested in, we essentially gave them preference shares. They weren't preference shares, but we saw to it that they got everything they put in first before a distribution of proceeds was made. And I think that's been something that's been really important along the way, is making sure that staff, shareholders, backers, any key stakeholders are always given everything that they deserve and more through these processes, particularly with staff. So they're definitely processes that take a lot of time, a lot of energy. And I think the DD process is lengthy. It obviously needs to be two ways. So probably some learnings around that. But ultimately, at the time, you need to make the best decision for the business, for your shareholders, and what's going to put this company in best stead to help achieve its ultimate growth ambitions.
And did you stay involved in the business after the acquisition? And if so, for how long?
I did. I worked for about 18 months. So we had a couple of years in an out period. Didn't quite work out with the parent company. There were some challenges at a headco level, which filtered down through the multiple areas that we were one of. It was a pretty wild ride, a lot of positives through that whole journey, but definitely a lot of learnings and a lot of challenges and setbacks. But along the way, we had some great people. We built a great team culture. We got scale quickly. We built something that we were proud of for the industry. We were fundamentally trying to make the industry hum better and make it more seamless. I guess our clients that used us, they loved us, but there was probably some cultural and transition challenges once we became part of a bigger company.
Yeah. What would you consider as your biggest strength as a leader, and one that's probably stayed with you over the course of that period of time?
Probably my ability to just get stuck into something relentlessly. If I commit to something, it's 120%, and I always find a way. I'm quite relentless in the pursuit of what I'm doing. I've probably built more resilience over time as well, just being really laser focused on achieving what I'm setting out to achieve, but also connecting the dots, seeing the play reading the play, whether it's connecting people, seeing the opportunity, seeing where the gap is. That can be intuition, or it can be because I do love data. I do love getting into the detail, seeing where the opportunity is. And that, I think, helps when you're starting a business, particularly in the early stages.
Yeah.
That's an important characteristic. I think that's why I've probably been successful getting things off the ground and making things happen. I love making things happen. And yeah, that sort of served me pretty well in the various businesses, and come from quite a technical commercial background too. So that's helpful.
What about in terms of your weaknesses? The things that you struggled most with, and how did you overcome them over time?
Yeah, probably my biggest weakness is I'm probably not an amazing manager. And I think when you're scaling early on, it's great because if it's up to 10 people, if you're not a great manager, you can probably get away with it. But as you scale businesses beyond that, it's a really important skill. And fundamentally, you have to love it. You have to love managing people and helping set the right procedures and processes and systems for feedback and accountability. It's probably not something that I fundamentally love. I love being on the tools. I do love being in the action, really, as probably an individual contributor. And I've just over time, I've become honest with myself around that. And there's other great managers out there. So in terms of how I've overcome that, it would be partnering with people that are great at that. They're great operators, they're great managers. They love managing people. They love performance reviews. I'm maybe a little bit soft on that side. And fundamentally, I love building things and doing versus managing large groups of people to make something happen.
What would you describe as your best decision you've ever made?
Definitely leaving investment banking. And actually, the reason I did leave, I was quite sick for a few months, and I thought I was loving what I was doing, by the way. I had a great team. I was working on amazing deals, but I was quite sick. So I'd work, I remember October 2009, I worked 30 days straight, including weekends, like full days. I had a couple of big transactions, and I'd get home and I'd just sleep. Weekends, I'd just sleep. I remember the Killers played. They were my favorite band at the time. They played, and I couldn't even go to their concert. I was just so tired. And I was like, I'm just going to be honest with myself. This banking lifestyle is actually killing me. And I did have a few business ideas as well. And I left, and the first thing I wanted to do was focus on my health and find out what was going on. And it turned out I actually had a thyroid issue from consuming a soy milk brand that had a cult following that got recalled off the market at the end of 2009. Funnily enough, the business idea that I left to pursue after investment banking, I saw a gap in the market for this soy milk brand and decided I wanted to make soy milk, but realized it was the thing that was poisoning me. And that took about 6 months to recover. So I had to swallow my ego, and I thought I was leaving because I just couldn't handle it, but I was fundamentally very sick. And it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, to be honest. And I think I did look in the mirror and took a bit of a look at myself and decided to take the plunge. And I was pretty happy with the fact that if I leave and I have a crack at doing my own thing, it may not work out. But I remember one of my colleagues, great guy, he said, "Rich, you can always come back here." And I think that in itself was the motivation to actually, I think deep down, I didn't want to go back to a corporate lifestyle in investment banking. I did want to pursue these other sort of goals and dreams. Yeah, that was a pretty interesting part of the journey. What seemed at the time very, very challenging, there was a silver lining for sure.
How old were you when you're going through that?
I would have been 27.
Yeah. So when you're going through that process, what advice was given to you around that time that helped you get through?
Yeah, I think be honest with yourself, do what you love. I remember our chairman in banking said, "Do what you love when you love what you do." And I actually really enjoyed the deal environment. I had an amazing team. I still keep in touch with all my team from my M&A days, a lot of them anyway. And we were working on some pretty cool transactions, but I knew deep down that I did want to pursue this other path. And I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever got given was that everyone fires at different times. And that really resonated with me because I did feel like I'd be taking quite a big step back. And financially, it's a big step back when you go from investment banking in the sort of 2005 to 2010 era to making beverages and selling it out of the back of a go-get van, which is what I was doing. There's some financial considerations and consequences of doing that.
Yeah.
But if you play the long game, and I was thinking that quote really resonated because whilst I'd be taking a backward step, long term, I knew that if I could put all that energy I was putting into a corporate career into something that I could essentially get 100% of the return on for every minute that I put in, it would bode well for me. So I think that's probably a really good piece of advice. And also doing what you love and starting something that you're passionate about and that your values, that are really aligned with your values, is also very important, particularly when things get hard. So startups are fraught with challenges, and that's just the nature of them. And when you've got your back against the wall, or you're trying to raise money in a very difficult environment, unless you're very passionate about your mission and you're laser focused on making that mission successful, it's very hard to get through. But if you've got that, I guess that bigger, whether it's a bigger purpose or it's just ultimately you love what you do, then it's much easier to get through, particularly when it's hard. I think that's the biggest, I guess, learning when it comes to mindset and why start something. It's that piece around when things get hard, are you going to be happy? Because it's not all rainbows and skittles starting and growing a business.
So what do you love most about what you do?
Now at Nexus, so Nexus Advisory is, I guess it's the third chapter of my career. First chapter was investment banking. Second chapter was 12 years of entrepreneurship. And for the last 2 years, I've been working with an old friend, Steve Mitchell, who founded Nexus Advisory. We help businesses, largely at SMEs, access funding from a network of over 200 lenders. So we work with banks, non-banks, private credit funds, alternative capital providers on sourcing fit for purpose funding solutions. So I absolutely love what I do. I work with founders and management teams in helping solve their funding challenges. I'm an extension of their team. I get really into the weeds of the business. I have clients across many sectors, so it's super interesting. A lot of the challenges we're solving for are growth challenges. And it's great because coming from an entrepreneurial background, this really resonates with me, but I've got a financial funding lens. Yeah. So it's really the juncture or a nexus, funnily enough, between what I was doing originally and also building brands and creating things from scratch and trying to bring something meaningful to more, whether it's businesses or consumers. So yeah, absolutely love it. It's very varied. So yeah, it's a super interesting part of the market. And I think it's a role or a space in the market I didn't realize existed until I teamed up with my business partner, Steve. And had I known that someone like me existed when I was building my businesses, it would have been super, super helpful, because obviously funding is challenging. The amount of times I applied to my bank to get funding and it got shut down, and you just think that you've got no other options. But there's so many other options out there. There's so much great capital looking to be deployed into founder-led businesses that have strong conviction. And I think more people could really benefit from a service like the one we provide. And we're small. We don't have huge ambitions to be a 50-person advisory firm. We both love doing what we do, being in the weeds with our clients. It just gets us really pumped to get out of bed each day.
Who are the business people that you admire most? There's
a few. Yvon Chouinard from Patagonia, definitely. Always really inspired me through my entrepreneur journey. Product first, was an accidental entrepreneur, just went out building things, started off building climbing equipment, pivoted when he realized his equipment was damaging rock faces. So he pivoted because it wasn't aligned with his values. Quite nimble, but always went about what he did without compromising his values, and ultimately became very successful. The product's amazing. I actually loved the product before I read about him. His approach to culture as well, in 2012, I read the book, Let My People Go Surfing, which is a great read for anyone looking to build a strong team culture built on similar principles to what he built Patagonia on. So that would probably be the one that comes to mind.
Yeah, okay. And what about in terms of books and those sorts of things in business that you'd recommend to people?
The one that had the most influence for me was Richard Branson's Screw It, Let's Do It.
Yep.
I picked it up at Bangkok airport. My flight was delayed. I was flying to Laos back at the start of 2010. I read it. Basically, by the time I got to Laos, I'd finished the book with the flight delay, and it just struck a chord with me. Everything he wrote in terms of his lessons in life and business just resonated really strongly. In particular, one line in that book was probably the reason I left corporate life and went out and started creating businesses. And that is, when it's not fun, move on.
Yeah.
And that really resonated with me because I saw this guy who created all these amazing businesses and an empire, really, but he always had a smile. He was always doing what he loved, seemingly. And I thought that was really admirable. And I wanted to go down a similar path. There's a bunch of other lessons in there around risk taking and protecting the downside and managing, being great with people, your suppliers, your customers, being very customer centric, keeping things simple, persist, but pivot and adapt when you need to. So there's some great lessons, but fundamentally the journey needs to be enjoyable. And particularly when things get difficult, that's when I think it matters most.
Yeah. And what about in terms of a quote or a mantra that you might live by? Is there anything that comes to mind on that side of things?
Absolutely. A smooth sea never made a skilled sailor by Roosevelt. That has always resonated with me. And I think over the years, I've started reading more around Stoicism, love Ryan Holiday's literature, The Obstacle is the Way. And it's really that quote and that, I guess, segment of literature, whether it's life or business, is really leaning into challenges make us, really, rather than the obstacle being something that impedes growth. The obstacle is the way. It forces you to look at objectively at things. It forces you to sharpen your sword, build resilience. There's so many great learnings that come out of that realm of literature, but also that quote, it just reminds you that when things don't go your way, they make you better.
Yeah.
And often there's a reason why. And one door closes, another opens, like Branson says, business opportunities are like buses. There's always another one. So just looking at things really objectively. And I think that's really important, not just as a founder, but just more broadly, being more calm, being more objective, just controlling what you can control, influencing what you can influence, and just accepting fate. And as Ryan Holiday says, amor fati, the love of fate, and just loving what is. I think there's some great literature in that space that I think over the years has helped shape some of my thinking around these topics.
Yeah. Rich, it's been great. Thank you very much for your time, mate. It's been fantastic.
Really appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on, Dion.
Thanks, mate.